Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about The Slightest Screen by Sahar Mustafah. If this author's name sounds familiar, she wrote the book The Beauty of Your Face, which I saw a lot of people recommending when recommending like Palestinian or Palestinian American authors to check out. And so this is her latest release. It just came out, I think, at the end of 2025. And so I put it on hold at my library to check out myself. And I really enjoyed my experience with this. This is kind of a multi-generational story. You are mainly following this young woman named Intisar. I apologize in advance for mispronouncing all of the Palestinian names in this book. And she is at like the modern day timeline, which takes place in 2007. She finds out that her father is dying and she is heading from Chicago to Palestine to basically see him one last time and things like that and to pay her respects. But this is kind of a complicated situation because she hasn't seen her father since she was a young child, like around 10 years old. He left her and her mother and returned back to Palestine in order to join the resistance. And they've had basically a limited relationship since then. When he originally went back, they would talk on the phone every now and then, but eventually he was arrested and was thrown into a really notorious prison. And he was basically supposed to serve his entire life there. And so once he was thrown into prison, he like lost contact with her. And then she had like limited contact with like his side of the family in general after that point. And so she has kind of like this disconnected relationship with her father and her father's side of the family. But then there's also just like more going on in Palestine. Intisar's grandmother is basically fighting to keep their family home and land. There is a man in the area who is trying to claim that he had some deal with Intisar's grandfather in order to purchase the land, and now that her father is dying, he's trying to like lay claim to the land, and her grandmother is trying to get Intisar to basically fight and to claim that the land is actually hers because she is, the heir basically for this land at this point. But it requires a lot of like complicated steps and things like that. And she's not sure if Intisar was willing to fight for this land at all, or if she just will take the money and go back to America and things like that. So yeah, like I said, overall, I really enjoyed my experience with this book. I thought it was really beautiful. It's a really interesting sort of point of view on not just what's happening in Palestine, because that is obviously a part of it, but it takes place in 2007. So there's still like multiple decades between then and what has happened now or what is currently happening now. But a lot of the conversation I feel like that's happening in this book is really just about like moving away from your home, especially your home country, and the connection you may or may not have with it at that point, and then also sort of like what it's like for the next generation at that point. I could relate to Intisar in a lot of ways because like my parents are from India, and so I have like a tenuous connection to India and the area that they're from and things like that. But do I actually like consider it my land to a certain degree or my home at all? And those are sort of the questions Intisar has as she like returns back to Palestine. So many people know in the area, in the neighborhood that her father grew up in, like knows her because they know her father. And so they greet her and they're excited to see her and things like that. And she's like not quite sure how to feel about all of that because it's kind of weird because she just doesn't know like anything about this land or this area or anything like that because she hasn't been in touch with this side of the family. She has a complicated relationship with her father because she left or he left her, and she was just a child when it happened, so she doesn't really know like what exactly happened, and she's was hoping that she would be able to have like a lot of these conversations with her father in order to like kind of understand him and to like potentially build a relationship with him. There's conversations about what it's like when you move away from your home country and things like that. I would say there's like three points of view basically in this book. There's Intisar, her grandmother, and then you also get a point of view from Intisar's father, Hafez. And a lot of those take place in the past, so you get to see what it's like when he first gets married and like moves to America and the life that they've built together as a family and the struggle that he has missing Palestine, missing his family, missing his homeland, and then seeing just what the country is going through and just feeling so much unrest about being in America and succeeding in so many different ways while like your homeland is destroyed and stuff like that. But it's also a discussion about how like your past informs your present and your future. How even though Intisar doesn't have a direct sort of connection over her past life in terms of like a direct connection to this land, she still is connected to it and its history and the things that have happened to her family in the past and things like that, and all of that influences like who she is, whether she realizes it or not. She still has a right to know her family and to know this land and things like that, and sort of the wrestling that you kind of have to do to understand this land that you are and you are not a part of. There's this really great quote on the back of the book that I want to read because I just feel like this sums it up really well. This is from another author, Susan Mudai Duraj, who I've never read from before, but I just feel like this quote really sums things up well. It says, Sahar Mustafah's sophomore novel is nothing short of magical, a story of the diaspora, of the eternal calling for Palestine that is gorgeous and illuminating. The past lives on, it cradles us, it strengthens us. A must read. And that's kind of how I feel about this book. I feel like that sums it up in a really good way of like the themes that are explored throughout this book, the connection to family and to a land that you may not have lived on or have spent a long time with, a connection to a past that you might not directly know, but you eventually learn about, trying to figure out how to build a relationship with family members you are estranged with. So yeah, I think if you are someone who enjoys family sagas, if you enjoy sort of multi-generational stories, if you enjoy stories about immigration and the diasporas in general, I think that this one is a really good one to pick up. I will say like the one downside or negative I would have to say about this book is that I had a little bit of a hard time with the ending. This book is a little bit slower moving. Like it's definitely more about like exploring this family and these relationships and things like that. And so like if you are someone who's more plot focused, you might have a harder time with this book because I do think it moves a little bit slower in terms of plot and like those explorations around like the family land and things like that. And I think that the way that it wraps up, it felt very like quick and almost too easy to a certain degree. So I could see people being like not fully satisfied with the ending. I don't know if I was necessarily fully satisfied with the ending. Like I was fine with it, but I wouldn't say it was an ideal ending in my opinion. But who am I to really say? I'm not an author. But I just was like, oh, okay, everything's wrapped up now. And then the book ended. And that's kind of how it felt to me, with like the book moving so slowly and then all of a sudden it kind of just wraps up, which, like may have just been the way to go with it in order to not have this book turn out to be like 500 pages or something along those lines. But like the pacing, I just felt like sped up really quickly towards the end of the book in order to get things wrapped up for the book to be able to finish. So that is definitely one thing that didn't really feel perfect in my opinion. And so like I rated this, I think either a 4 or a 4.5 star. But overall, I think that this is a pretty strong novel, especially if you're someone who doesn't mind a slower plot, more character focused story. So yeah, those are my quick thoughts on The Slightest Screen. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read this book, what your thoughts were on it, or if you have any questions, feel free to leave that down in the comment section as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.